Hello.
Good morning. Thank you so much for covering. So kind. Is Henry?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay, but I can hear you.
Okay, I'm just leaving for the airport, Angie, which is why Henry's covering this morning. So yeah, people should be automatically joining. I think Chris Bumford's going to come on and just monitor things, and we are being recorded, I think. So Henry and Chris will go through it with you. So
that's lovely.
But I just want to say thank you very, very much for stepping up at such short notice.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Steve.
Yeah. It's good. Well, are you in Spain now, or are you in the UK? Or?
Yes, I'm up in the mountains of Granada at the Sierra Nevada mountains, and our closest airport is Granada, and I'm back in the UK in a week after next. So I'm hoping to meet up with Henry when I come over next time. I haven't seen him for quite a few years.
That'd be lovely. Or maybe get a coffee or a lunch or something like that.
Yeah, that's we're hoping.
Get that. So I hope the session goes well. So I'll just I'll sort of mute and sort of wait for Henry to join. I think Henry maybe have joined already, but really appreciate it.
I'm on.
Hi Henry, I'm just saying hello, and I'm just going to the airport, Henry. So over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Hospital pass. Hi Angie, how are you?
Hi there, Henry. I'm extremely coughing and snuffling and sneezing. So if I have a coughing fit, I'll try and move away from the microphone. I don't.
I like the idea of you being able to give us coronavirus over the web.
Well, I have tested myself, and it's definitely not coronavirus. So you can't catch corona from me. So,
we got Steve on the phone on the call. Steve, I don't know how. Hi, how are you? Are you there? He's on mute. I always get worried by people who shouldn't be on the call being on the call and being mute.
Well, he's muted himself. I don't know if he can hear us.
Steve may well be one of Steve Goddard's people. Hello, Chris. Good
Hi Angie. Hi,
one of Steve Goddard's people.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, sorry, I had a couple of issues joining, but I got it sorted. Sorry.
We've got this chap Steve McLeod over here. I don't know who he is, and he's sat on the call. Is he one of our chaps?
I'm one of Steve's chaps. So.
Hello, Steve. Very nice.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. And you. And you.
We were once photobombed or bombed on one of these things by somebody who managed to creep in, and I wondered if you were a number, but you aren't. I'm sorry for confusing you as being so.
He's MI5, I reckon.
This is going to be a lot of fun because Angie and I are old friends. We're going to have Simon on the call as well. Simon, you're coming in around about minute 50 to do a PSAG update, yeah?
Just about the Pensions Advice Task Force, as far as I understand. Yeah, the other stuff I know nothing about.
Okay, Angie, Steve, Simon, Angie, I don't think you know each other.
You?
Hi, Angie. I'd spotted you'd been on LinkedIn this morning, so I do know who you are.
Okay, and Angie will explain who she is during the course of the call. She's not Margaret Snowden, right?
I'm not Scottish at all.
No.
Although you know each other, don't you? You and Margaret.
Yes, we do. Yes, I met her at one of the task force symposiums quite a few years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Angie basically is a Spanish resident who has an English background, and you look after the interests of hundreds of scam victims. Is that right, Angie?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to correct you there. It's thousands now, Henry. It's grown horrifically in the last few years. In the last 4 or 5 years, it's quadrupled. It's just a horrific situation, and I'd love to say it was getting better, but it isn't. It's getting worse.
Okay, so we'll organise it like this: that I'll kick off with Angie in loco Margaret, and we've got a series of 6 questions to get through, and there'll be no doubt questions from the audience, as they usually are. People put their hands up, Angie, to ask a question, or they put a question into chat, and we spot those questions and put them to you as we're going along. And Simon is free to come in at any stage and ask questions, and then he'll have his own bespoke bit of the thing. How long do you want, and Simon?
I don't really mind. I think, Ange, if from your perspective, the Pensions Advice Task Force is designed to help people, particularly to help them make informed choices by working within the industry. And I would say 2 of the things it needs to do is to protect people from sharks and scammers, because it's not just the scammers, is it? So from that perspective, if I could just integrate with you at your choice, right, and just bring that in, and because the intention of this, from what we wanted to do with Margaret, is to make an appeal. The Pension Playpen's an incredibly powerful network with lots of people who are in it because they want to do the right thing, and no one organisation can, this is the Consumer Duty Alliance, can do anything on its own. And the industry's worked almost in disparate segments, your occupational, your working schemes, your financial advisor, that type of thing. Okay, so just bring me in when it's appropriate, and there's no expectation from me, Henry, because I was just the backroom guy for Margaret. That's all I was. So.
Okay, just remind me exactly the organisation, because I mistakenly thought that you were part of PSAG. You aren't part of PSAG. You are.
No, it's the Pensions Advice Task Force, Henry, which is part of the Consumer Duty Alliance, and it was formally attached loosely to the PFS. It did the Pension Transfer Gold Standard, for example, and it's doing some work at the moment around not just retirement space, but generally support, guidance, and access to advice to consumers, making it clear with direct relationships with consumers how they can get access to stuff they can trust.
But this Pensions Advice Task Force, is it actually linked into government, or is it a private initiative?
No, it's the Consumer Duty Alliance, and if you'll recall, you had Keith Richards on, who's the CEO of that, talking about it some time ago.
It's the Consumer Duty Alliance, it's Keith Richards. Okay, and it's private. Okay, that's fine. All right, that's very good. And I'm going to have to explain to everyone that they've all been sold a pup. Not just have I sold you as PSAG, Simon, but I've also sold Margaret Snowden as Angie Brooks, or the other way around. That's what you telling me to do.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is.
You didn't, Henry. In the covering, you referenced Margaret. I had like one line saying I would talk about the Pensions Advice Task Force, so you don't have to. You didn't do. It's not a pup there, and of course the position with Margaret is unavoidable and sad. So there's nothing anybody could have done with that. So.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Good. So where are we now? 10:28. Angie, have you got any questions?
No.
Are you happy with the questions I'm going to ask you?
Yeah, I've got them in front of me.
Right. Okay. Well, I will ask them to you. You can't prejudge what questions are going to be, but they will be those questions.
Okay.
And feel free. We will try and jolly this along at a nice pace and get everyone happy. Are you happy, Chris?
Yeah, it's cool, Henry. Yeah. Did you want me to do a sort of Stevie intro, or you going to go ahead with it all?
I'll do the intro if I may.
Cool, lovely, perfect.
Okay, just because it's also complicated by Margaret not being around.
No worries at all. Yeah, cool.
So where are we now? 10.
Angie, before everybody joins, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Will this, I've noticed there's a big issue with Bright overseas in terms of raising capital on existing client money and things like that. Will that, in actual fact, cause an explosion for you again in terms of, because it would appear that there's a hell of a lot of people affected by that in the US and in Australia, from at least from what I can see.
Thousands. We're talking 1 billion in Australia, 1 billion in the US, and probably 500 million in South Africa.
It looks nasty. I've seen the SEC stuff, but I don't fully understand it, if I'm honest. But it does. I've never seen anything like that before in my life, and I'm kind of thinking, how the hell has that worked? So
yeah, it's
okay.
it's a catastrophe.
You talk about this as part of question 5. What are your current projects?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So, sorry, Angie. It was something I've noticed. So
Excellent. Thank you very much, Simon. Good. I think we should start letting people in if we can.
I think it's set for everyone to just join as and when, Henry. So
Is it?
It is.
Oh, hello, Derek.
I'm Richard.
Yeah,
Yeah, no problems anyway.
Excellent. So we have Derek on the call. We have Chris, Alma, Steve. That's Steve? Steve Wall? Yes, it is. I've got a very annoying chat bot getting in the way of who I want to be looking at. Richard. Hi, Steve. Yeah.
We've got somebody who looks like Stephen Ward. Do you want to clarify that, Henry?
That's Stuart Ward.
Stuart Ward, okay.
Stuart Ward, you'll be pleased to know it's not Stephen Ward.
Good.
Stephen Ward would not be acceptable on this call. Very good to see. Richard, hi. John, hi. David, hi. Barry, as always, you are a super regular attendant. Nice to see you, Barry. Yeah.
Thank you.
And okay, I think we are just about at quorum. So let's kick off, shall we? And
can I just check if everyone's happy for me to record the session?
Yep, all happy.
I'm happy. Good.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, so as you will have seen if you read my blog or if you get the emails, we are without Margaret, who has unfortunately had a family bereavement, and she is currently doing the legals and grieving, and we grieve for her. So I'm very sorry that of her loss, which I won't break confidences, but it's one of those happy losses where people pass peacefully in their 90s. Okay. I am also delighted that we have in her place one of my old friends, someone who I've worked with now for, I think, 10 years more, maybe longer than that, Angie Brooks. And Angie is well known to anyone who is a scammer as the scourge of the scammers. She is somebody who has spent her last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, maybe longer, she will explain, helping people who have been scammed, giving them the support through the courts and so on. And it's great to have her on the call. And I think that she's got a lot to say about what's happened and what's happening and what we can do to make sure that we reduce the incidence of scams and their impact on people. So without more ado, welcome, Angie. Hi.
Thank you, Henry.
Good. Now, give us your backstory, Angie. How did you get involved in all this? And how have you been helping people over the years?
So it all started before I left the UK. I had a tax consultancy business where I specialised in contentious tax appeals, and my specialist area was agricultural inheritance tax, so absolutely nothing to do with pensions. And shortly, a couple of years after I moved to Spain, I was approached by a few ARC victims a couple in Spain and a couple in the UK, where they asked
what
me.
ARC is? Could you just, before
Sorry?
we carry on, could you explain what ARC is? Because not everyone will know.
Okay, ARC is a collection of 6 occupational pension schemes which were set up by the dreaded Stephen Ward, which is why I asked about Stuart Ward. And
Sorry, Stuart. No offence.
yes, with the express intention of operating a scheme which would make a lot of money, and the way to attract as many people as possible. Bearing in mind, we're talking about 2010, only 2 years after the terrible recession, where people lost their jobs, they lost their businesses, they lost their homes, they got into terrible debt. So it was a money-making scam intended to attract a lot of investment so that they could invest people's money into the sort of toxic property, illiquid assets that would earn them, Stephen Ward and his cronies, a lot of commission. And operating what Stephen Ward called loans, or MPVAs, was the carrot, but well, both the carrot and the stick, because a lot of these people were in desperate trouble and about to lose their homes, their businesses, and they were in just awful situations. And he had managed to get 27 million into the ARC schemes, and about 8 million of that was paid out in loans, which Stephen Ward, as a level 6 qualified chartered insurance institute pensions examiner and the author of the Tolley's pensions tax manual, assured all of these 487 people, oh, there's no tax payable on this money. It's perfectly legitimate, legal, lawful, compliant with tax law. And of course, the pensions regulator spotted this quite quickly, and so did HMRC, and they were horrified, and they appointed Dalriada trustees in May 2011 and put a stop to any more transfers and any more loans. So it was pension liberation, basically. And within a couple of years, the first tax assessments, aka tax demands, started going out, and all these hundreds of people started reading the communications from both Dalriada and HMRC and realised that they stood to be penalised at the rate of 55% on these so-called loans that they were given, MPVAs they were called, which stands for Maximising Pension Value Arrangement. And it went before the High Court, Justice Bean, in November 2011, and he called it a fraud on the power of investment, and said that the loans, the MPVAs, constituted unauthorised payments, which is a definition of pension liberation. Any form of withdrawal from a pension, and I'm sure I'm teaching my grandmothers to suck eggs here, is classed as an unauthorised payment and subject to 55% tax if it's more than 25% of the total pension value. So I was initially very reluctant to take any of these cases on because I knew zero about pensions. And eventually I found out that quite a few people had gone to all sorts of lawyers and accountants and tax advisors, and some people spent a lot of money and got absolutely nowhere. So I started taking these cases on, and that was in 2013 when it first started. So I'm now into my 11th year of working on the ARC cases. And it finally came to court in the tax tribunals in December 2022, and we lost hands down. So when I say we, I mean the members and Dalriada trustees who had been appointed by the pensions regulator. And HMRC won the right to tax all ARC members, irrespective of whether they received a loan or not. And a lot of people didn't receive a loan. So we have this very anomalous situation now where all ARC members will be taxed, whether they received a loan or not, at the rate of 55%. And if you roll that back to 2011, it's going to be well over 100% of the loans that they made, not the loans that they received, but the loans that they made. So what Stephen Ward and his merry men did, one of which was a lawyer, one of which was an accountant, one of which was a pensions administrator and IFA, what they did, they produced a spreadsheet called a matching spreadsheet, and they set up these 6 individual occupational schemes with different trustees, so that a member joined one occupational scheme but received his loan from a different occupational scheme in a reciprocal fashion. So Chris and Simon, because you're the two at the top of my screen. So Chris, if you had a £100,000 transfer into ARC A, and Simon, you had a £100,000 pension transfer in ARC B, then Chris would be matched with Simon, and Chris would lend £50,000 to Simon, and Simon would lend £50,000 to Chris. Now, that's quite straightforward, but not all of the members were as straightforward as that, because if Simon had only had £50,000 in his pension transfer value, then we would probably need Derek, who also had £50,000, to be matched with Chris. So this incredibly complex matching spreadsheet was what did for the ARC members. Now, the lead appellant in these proceedings was a chap called Jeremy Donaghy-Sutton, who had the second largest aggregate transfer value of all of the ARC members. He had close to £400,000, and he was matched with 7 different ARC members. And one of my defences on his behalf in the court was that although on paper, on a spreadsheet, it is clear that he was matched with these 7 people, these 7 people actually received their loans before Jeremy Donaghy-Sutton ever transferred into ARC. So although the spreadsheet may say that he loaned the equivalent of 400,000 or 200,000 to these 7 people, he couldn't possibly in the real world, because his money was still with the British Midland scheme, with Halifax, and with the EasyJet PUP scheme. He had 3 transfers. And HMRC successfully argued before the tax tribunal judges that it didn't matter, because he was on that spreadsheet and he joined the scheme with the clear intention of not only receiving a loan, but of making his pension transfers available to members of opposite schemes so that they could receive loans from his money. And that if the dates didn't match up, if it was physically and mathematically impossible for his money to have been used to pay out loans to other members of other schemes, didn't matter, because the intention, the clear intention on the part of Jeremy and all of the other members was for their money to be used to make loans, i.e. unauthorised payments, i.e. pension liberation. So we lost. And I sat next to Michael Jones KC, who was representing Dalriada. And although he wasn't there to argue the plight necessarily of the members themselves. Michael Jones was there to argue the plight of Dalriada. He lost even worse than I did, because on top of the members probably losing all of their remaining funds, because Chris, for example, he may have started with 100,000, but half of that was used to make a loan to Simon, or Simon and Chris, or Simon and Derek, or whoever. But what remains of his £50,000 in his ARC scheme has mostly now been spent on Dalriada's fees and Pinsent Mason's fees. And when their next set of accounts comes out, I'm fully expecting all of the piggy banks to be empty for the 6 operating ARC schemes. But what Dalriada has lost is the fact that when all of the members' funds have been exhausted, if there isn't enough money for Dalriada trustees to pay the scheme sanction charge for operating and facilitating these loans, they are going to be taxed at 40% of all of the members' funds. Now, that's going to come up to, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 6 million, depending on how you work it out. And so that will exhaust everything that's left in the ARC coffers, and then it's going to hit Dalriada trustees' own pockets themselves. So even though it wasn't Dalriada trustees who originally set the schemes up and operated the loans, they didn't take over until the 31st of May 2011 at the behest of the pensions regulator. They're not exonerated, and there wasn't an indemnity put in place for independent trustees like Dalriada until 2014, when all parties, the pensions regulator and the FCA and HMRC, realised, holy guacamole, these poor independent trustees such as Pi Consulting and Dalriada, and there's a stable of about 7 or 8 of them who are appointed as independent trustees to irregular or distressed occupational schemes. They actually stand to be financially ruined themselves. So I started off back in 2013 representing the members, and it took 9 years to get that case to court in the tax tribunal. But then I started investigating Stephen Ward and found that when ARC was shut down, he immediately jumped on a plane, went to New Zealand and set up his next pension liberation scam, which was another occupational scheme in New Zealand called Evergreen. And he operated the same model, 50% loans against all of the transfers. That got shut down by the New Zealand regulator and by HMRC. So he moved straight into Capita Oak, which was another 10 million. And that whole lot was invested in store pods. And then he set up Henley.
That's what store pod is.
That was Toby Whittaker's store pods, yes, which are now all completely worthless. You can't give them away.
These are containers which you put your unwanted junk into. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. And actually, the company Store First was liquidated, and Toby Whittaker bought it back for £1. And he's now making a lot of money. He's got a mansion. He's got a top of the range Range Rover with registration plate TW1, and hasn't been prosecuted. He was paying 46% in commission to the introducers and the salesmen and the so-called financial advisors who were bringing their clients to Capita. 46%, yes. The base rate was 30%. but there was a further 16%, which comprised of 8% a year guaranteed to be paid to the members, which was 2 years worth of guaranteed rental income on the store pods. But that money accidentally, got paid to the scammers instead. And when they'd filled up Capita Oak and Henley with these worthless store pods, which were grossly overvalued, they then went to Carey and Barclay Burke, and there was another couple of £100 million worth of store pods and 46% commissions paid to the scammers. And we had a marvellous victory, one of the few good news stories, which was Professor Gerard McMeal, KC, managed to get Carey pensions eventually in the appeal court, having lost in the court of first instruction, lost in the High Court. He came back for a third bite of the cherry on behalf of lorry driver Russell Adams, who was advised by a company in Spain, I'm sorry to say, called Country Land and Property. And he managed to get an award against Carey Pensions for allowing their members, even though it's a SIPS, to be invested in such toxic, illiquid, unsuitable assets, and to take the advice, the transfer advice, from an unregulated, unqualified advisor.
I guess I'm getting the picture that scamming evolved from the liberation scam into this more sophisticated asset style scam, where the assets themselves were simply being used as a pass-through for commissions and for gross profitability on one side, and no profitability for the policyholders. Exact opposite of consumer duty, I guess.
Yeah, and also, Henry, the important thing to remember is that in 2013, there was Project Bloom, which was run by the pensions regulator, HMRC, the FCA, and some other interested parties. And it was set up to warn not only members, pension scheme members, but also the pension providers themselves to understand what to look out for and how to help their members to avoid from being targeted by such scams. So that knocked a big hole in the pension liberation opportunities for the scammers. And so that drastically slowed down. It didn't stop, but it slowed down. But the money to be made was never from the liberation, it was from the investments. And if you think about the maths, if we keep 100% of Chris's 100 grand in the scheme and invest that 100 grand in a store pod for 46%, then you make an awful lot more money than if you attract more people but hand out 50% of their pensions. So it's much better to go for better quality victims with more money to invest in Dolphin Trust, which was paying 25%, Park First, which was paying 25%, structured notes, all sorts of Brazilian teak forests and truffle tree forests and Cape Verde collapsible flats, which paid 20, 25, 30%. So it makes much more economic sense, if you're a scammer, to ignore the liberation bit altogether, and just go for guaranteed returns of 8%, 12%, 15%, whatever number you want to think up, because it's going to be zero. We all know it's going to be zero, but what you promise your unfortunate victims is basically down to the individual scammer to choose, to decide as part of the overall appeal. So you've now got things like the Blackmore bond, all of the various mini bonds that are now worthless. You've got Blackmore Global, which was also run by the same people who ran Blackmore Bond. And it's still a very, very flourishing industry. You've got the asset providers who are very, very eager to provide the assets, a lot of property-based assets, whether it's a bond, whether it's, for example, a Christensen Property Capital mini bond, which was supposedly aimed at disabled ex-servicemen. So it's, you know, it's an ethical investment as well as being a great investment, and you're going to get a lot more than this sort of 0.25% that the banks were offering. So 8%.
We're moving into ESG scam now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Picking up on the sort of developments of the scam, we moved from pension liberation through to sort of sexy investments, and now towards the more ethical type investments. I've heard a few stories about people moving into this space on the basis that they are very ethical, super ethical people. They'll steal your money in a very green way. Yeah.
Oh, and
okay.
Yes.
Right. You sound very frustrated with the legal system, Angie. You've had the odd success, but not many. Without going on too long about the legal system, do you think the things which we can get better at from the legal side to make sure that scammers get brought to justice? Or do you think it's just a waste of, we will never get there? Do you think the scammers will always win?
Well, the thing that makes me the angriest is that one of the leading scammers, who was a guy called James Hadley, who was involved in Capita Oak and Henley and the Trafalgar Multi-Asset Fund in the Cayman Islands, which was 100% invested in Dolphin Trust in Germany, has been under investigation by the Serious Fraud Office for the last 5 years. And a judge has now declared his various crimes openly in court, which included fraud and deliberately misleading the public, which included a lot of police officers, by the way. And yet he is still out there selling sasses, selling properties. And even though he has been declared openly in the public domain a fraudster and a criminal, he's still not behind bars. And I believe that the Serious Fraud Office will only really bother to get out of bed and change out of their pajamas and their slippers if they can get the money back, because they take, I can't remember what it is, but I think it's 60% of recoveries they take. And if they can see that the assets are worthless and the defendants haven't got any money, they just don't bother. So it sends out entirely the wrong message. And we started this conversation with talking about Bright. Bright is probably going to destroy a large proportion of $2.5 billion for thousands and thousands of people. And Mark Donnelly's chuckling his socks off because he knows he's never going to see the inside of a cell.
So can you tell us what Bright is? I don't know what Bright is, and I doubt most people on the call do. Simon. So
Bright Advisors was set up by a chap called Mark Donnelly, who has a criminal record for theft. And his right-hand man is a guy called Gordon Couch, who's also just been released from prison after 2 years serving for embezzlement. And they bought De Vere South Africa, De Vere USA for £1 each. And then they also bought De Vere Australia for another £1. So for about £3, they got $2.5 billion worth of AUM. And the vast majority of the clients were in insurance bonds. So they were with Quilter, Generali, Friends, Provident, and RL360. And so what Mark Donnelly did, he set up a system whereby he said to all his clients, look, these insurance bonds are no good because they're very expensive, they're very inflexible, and they're not the right product for you. So I'm going to redeem you out of your insurance bond. Excuse me. And then you won't have the drag of the quarterly charges, which is going to make it impossible for your funds to grow. But of course, what he did, and he paid all the redemption penalties, but what he did, he then locked them in for 10 years in his own investments that not only clawed back the redemption penalties that he'd paid out of his own pocket. Well, he hadn't paid it out of his own pocket. He went to a loan shark in Ireland and leveraged the underlying assets. And basically, all of these people have gone from the frying pan into an inferno the size of which this planet has never seen.
This is Bright Investments, yeah?
Yes, yes. So it's going to be right back to where we were with ARC in 2010. His own investments, which pay him more commission than the redemption fees that he's paid out in order to lock in these thousands of clients in Australia, the USA, and South Africa, and Dubai for the next 10 years. So he's guaranteed he can keep them. He can keep charging them 1% a year. So 1% of 2.5 billion is quite a lot of fancy cars in anybody's money, and they can't get out. So they're all stuck there.
So let's bring ourselves right up to date. Is this what you're working on right now? Are
Yes.
there other scams out there? Is Bright the main one?
Bright wasn't the main one. I've been working on the Hong Kong scheme. That it was an occupational scheme with 27 million in it, which was used for pension liberation, high risk commission laden assets like Blackmore Global, Christensen Property Capital, Mini Bond, and a whole host of other toxic stuff. And a company in the Czech Republic called Planet Pensions, which used to be Square Mile, and before that it was Activa. But they were bought out by Mark Donnelly of Bright. And all of the schemes that I've been involved with, it's like a leapfrog. You start with one scheme and then you find one person or one asset is involved in something else. And you start working on something else, and then that goes to another 2 something else's and another 4 something else's. And before you know it, you've gone from what I started with in 2013, which was the £27 million ARC scheme, and I'm now working on about 360 million worth of different schemes. And if I take on the Bright case, that's $2.5 billion. So that's going to be another leapfrog up a, not just up a little molehill, it's going to be a huge mountain.
My observation in all this is that the same names have occurred again and again and again,
Yes.
but there is a very small pool of scammers. Indeed, it seems like you've just encountered the same people again and again and again over the last 12 years of your career, Angie.
Yes, absolutely. And they're still not sanctioned in any way. I tried very hard. I took criminal proceedings against Stephen Ward and all of the Continental Wealth advisors. And that was 4 years and an awful lot of money in legal fees, and we got nowhere. Because the Spanish legal system could not understand why you've got British people with British pensions being sent off to Malta to a cure ops, and then being sent off to Ireland to an insurance bond, and then invested in Swiss assets. What's that all about? Why don't these stupid English people go to a Spanish financial advisor who would give them proper, regulated, qualified advice? So the judge just threw it out after 4 years.
So the complexity for them was just too great. And
Yes.
I guess there was insufficient interest anywhere for the judges to really get excited and engage with the case properly. Okay, we've had an interesting question coming from Martin Tingle, who's one of our regulars and a member of the MAPS organisation, or was. Martin, do you want to explain what your question is, or do you want me to read it out?
No, it's okay. Thanks very much,
Yeah.
and thanks particularly to Angie for jumping in to, be with us today at such short notice. That's really appreciated. You were saying earlier about some of the scams you were talking about were where big sums were involved. There were attractive people for the scammers because they had, sizable pots. The regulations and the legislation over referring people who want to transfer for a pension safeguarding call with Money Helper are being revised. And I just wonder if at the moment there's no minimum level. So each transfer is meant to be assessed on its individual situation and referred if the trustees, if the scheme perceive that there's a risk. But there's no minimum level. Now, do you think it would help if there was a minimum level? Would it, restore faith in the system and perhaps reduce the number of complaints about, they're just delaying it, when it's a potentially very small sum involved? Or do you think it would be counterproductive and encourage the scammers and others to start harvesting really small pots, knowing that they probably would get transferred without question? So it's just about sort of striking that balance, I think, and whether some of these rules and protections that are being introduced or revised actually might be counterproductive.
Thank you for the question. I see a lot of people complaining about the recalcitrance of some of the seeding providers, and I myself have just emptied a little pension pot I'd forgotten about, and it was £4,890, and they made me, I didn't have a financial advisor involved, they made me jump through hoops for about 3 months and declare over and over and over again whether I wanted financial advice, whether I wanted to talk to Money Helper. And eventually, with great persistence, I got my 4,900 out. I think the seeding providers need to be on this blooming call. They need to understand what they've got to look for. They need to understand what the red flags are. And we need to get over a very big hurdle, which was a terrible case, the Royal London v Hughes, Donna Marie Hughes, where the pensions ombudsman's decision in a particular case where Royal London stood up and said, we don't like the look of this transfer, we're not going to let it go. And Donna Marie Hughes, who was backed by the scammers, she only had an £8,000 transfer. They took the case to the High Court, and Justice Morgan said, no, that there's no reason why a singing teacher who lives in a caravan on the South Coast shouldn't join an occupational scheme that's never traded and never employed anybody, because the legislation doesn't say, it just says that a person needs to have earnings of a description. You don't have to be employed by the employer, by the sponsoring employer of an occupational scheme. So no, the pensions ombudsman was wrong, and that the transfer should have been allowed. And this, of course, opened the floodgates to Cape Verde, and hundreds of millions of pounds were lost because of that judgment. So the whole pension provision industry was then A, absolutely horrified, and B, terrified of getting adverse complaints against them for unreasonably or unnecessarily holding up transfers. And of course, as we know, Sir Steve Webb was with Royal London, and you couldn't have had a more knowledgeable director of policy in the driving seat of Royal London at the time. But it made a huge retrospective or retrocessive step forward for the whole industry, and it was great news for the scamming industry. So I think that the answer to your question is it's not going to help. Wherever the bar is set, it's got to be much more about these seeding providers looking at the the transfers that they did allow and seeing what they did wrong. I employ one of my senior analysts is ex-Egon, and she worked in Edinburgh for, as it was then, Scottish Equitable, and she said to me, it used to make I was sick. I felt so sick when I could see the ease with which they allowed these transfers. They didn't ask any questions. I think now they ask too many questions, but the wrong questions. And I think that you need to get these seeding providers sitting around a table, and they need to come on this call, and they need to look at some of the transfers that they've allowed. And for example, in the Hong Kong case that I've been working on since 2016 now, I've got Friends Life and Phoenix Life who both blocked transfers for very cogent reasons, but they let through hundreds of other transfers. So for exactly the same transfer to exactly the same scheme for the same reasons, on one member they've said, no, we're not doing that because it's clearly a scam. It's got all the red flag signs. And yet the next person who comes along, yep, here we go, off you trot, off to Hong Kong, to an occupational scheme. So we need to educate them, Henry.
At the very granular level, call centres and the people who actually deal with these things on a day-to-day basis, everyone isn't the same. Everyone's got different levels of expertise, and you do get these anomalies at all kinds of levels. I don't know what the answer is either, other than that we need to get spectacularly better at spotting the good from the bad, not allowing good people the right to transfer, but stopping bad people from taking people's money. Yes, I agree. And I think at that moment, we've had an amazing 40 minutes worth of education really on what's happened. I'd be interested just to throw it open to the audience. Have we collectively got any questions arising from what Angie has said? Yes, John. John, I might add, is a former Scottish Equitable man.
Yes, indeed. I mean, sadly, some of the names of many of the things you mentioned, we used to avoid them like the plague, and not least, we didn't have the evidence, but you had a feeling, which was very difficult. Thank you for. I don't know what to thank you for what you've informed me of this morning, because it's a Hammer House of Horrors. It really is quite shocking. I guess one question I've got is this business of occupational schemes allowing transfers where members aren't employed or have never been employed by that entity is something that I find quite anomalous. It doesn't fit for me with the whole framework of what an occupational scheme is all about, because it's in the keys in the word occupation. Is there anything that can be done in that space? Or is it the fact that these occupational schemes are non-UK domiciled that gets them around legislation, if it were to come to pass, that it stopped people transferring to an entity that they weren't employed by?
Okay, so the problem that you've just highlighted actually is the fact that going back a few years, it was ridiculously easy to register an occupational scheme. Anybody could do it. So you go onto the Companies House website, you create ABC Limited, you pay your 20 quid, and then you go onto HMRC website and you register an occupational pension scheme. And all you need is the PSTR number from HMRC, and bish bash bosh, you've got a nice little occupational scheme ready, willing and able, which is what the legislation wording says, to accept transfers.
That occupational pension scheme has now to be regulated by the pension regulator, and it isn't just a standalone type thing which does what it likes. So it's a lot harder now to run an occupational pension scheme scam than it was in those days. And I don't think we see so many of them, do we?
No, but they are now using SIPs, SASs and CUROPs with great effect. So they don't need them anymore. And this is what happens, Henry. It morphs. Yeah, you close one door and 6 other doors open up.
Yeah, I mean, that sadly makes sense that if it turns from a regulated entity scam to an asset scam within a regulated entity, which I understand. Sadly. Thank you.
Okay. Martin, you got another question, I think, or you got your hand up again?
Yeah, if it's okay, if I could come back for a second bite at the cherry. I wanted to ask Angie, bless you, are there any changes in the legislation and so that referral for the money helper safeguarding call that you would like to see that you think could improve things?
Yes, I think that one of the most important things is understanding who's giving the advice. Excuse me, I'm sorry about this. Because it's always easy to spot who a scammer is. Because if you go onto good old Mr. Google, put in the words Bright Advisors or Mark Donnelly, Gordon Couch, Stephen Ward, whoever it is, you're going to get a result. And it's so easy to do some due diligence. It's so easy to ask, what's the purpose of this transfer? What are they proposing investing you in? What have you been promised? Ask the question. And the answer's always there. And I think it would be very helpful if I sent you some of the redacted copies of the rejection letters that I got from the Hong Kong scheme, from the seeding providers Phoenix Life and Friends Life, who said no. Because
I'll put you in. I'm conscious of the fact that you are.
Hold on one second. I'm just going to get some.
You're about that. I'm going to actually hand over now because this is probably a good moment to do so, and we can come back to Angie when she's a little bit better. And Simon, would you like to take on the conversation? Take yourself off mute and give us an update. And I'm very sorry, I've been advertising you as PSAG, and you are actually the Pension Advice Task Force. So can you give us your Pension Advice Task Force update now, and we may finish off with Angie at the end. Thank you.
Yes. I'm going to say thanks to Angie, because actually you made my life here a lot easier, because my job on behalf of the Pensions Advice Task Force and subbing in for Margaret, because I'm the backroom guy, was to really give an appeal via the Pension Playpen, which is possibly the most powerful network in the UK. It's got so many members, Henry, and things like that. The Pension Advice Task Force is put together or reconstituted by the Consumer Duty Alliance, which is run by Keith Richards. And in the past, it was affiliated for a time with the Personal Finance Society, and it produced the Pension Transfer Gold Standard. And I've sort of listened to Angie now. I want to change the way that I did this. So I still want to make the appeal. But actually, what listening to you, Angie, you've sort of taught me is like trying to solve the problem after the event is proving nigh on impossible, right? Whether it be a shark or a scammer, in my simple mind, somebody that takes your money without you understanding that they're taking it and not using it for your benefit is a thief, right? Calling them a scammer almost professionalizes them, right? It gives them the white collar, and they're a thief, right? And actually, I don't think they play products. I think they play people. You know, I think you, Angie, talked about the people you would like on this call to be the individuals that are administrating the transaction. And I started off as a pensions administrator. And when I was a pensions administrator, I was a young lad. And I wouldn't, and mind you, Google didn't exist when I was a young lad, Dr. Google or otherwise. And I wouldn't have known to do that because I was wet behind the ears because I was a young lad. And I was under pressure to do the transaction and to get the work out the door and so on and so forth. The point of the Pensions Advice Task Force, ultimately what we want to do is to engage with consumers and to do that about, there's so many good things that people try to do, like you, Angie, in the industry, or Keith Richards in the past, or Margaret Snowden. There's lots of people trying to do good things. Often it's segmented into occupational or financial advice or financial services and things like that, and it doesn't always co-join or lock in together. So the point of the Pension Advice Task Force is to really find a way to engage with consumers and to pass on the benefit of this good work that everybody is doing. I always think the pension playpen is being a loose band of people in an industry that wants to do the right thing, which is why there is the appeal to say, help us here, help us to understand what's going on, help us to interlock it. And what we intend to do is to actually, if you like, a perfect scenario would be no matter which way a person sought support or guidance, they would end up in an agreed set of documents that they couldn't understand. Because again, the reason that I think these people can play people, one, they're very good. They've got that hairs on the back of the neck stand-up moment when they know they've captured you. They're excellent salespeople. So they're intuitive. And secondly, everybody's scared, particularly of pensions, because they don't understand it. So there's a language barrier there. So really, I don't want to take up too much time. I want to reinforce what Angie said and said the best way to stop it is to not let it happen in the first place, right? Which is what the sort of red, amber, green, the regulation was about, trying to help trustees to stop bad things happening. And here, the intention of the Advice Task Force is to really find a way by bringing all of these good initiatives together, asking the people who want to help us, and creating almost a map that says it doesn't matter whether you ask your administrator, whether or not you ask a consultant, whether you ask your IFA, whether or not you engage with Pension Life, Angie, and you see, you know, it'd be wonderful to have these consumer documents on your website so people overseas who are UK residents know if you see X, run for your life, you know, and that doesn't just have to be a scammer. That's just the best to be somebody who charges you a bloody fortune for doing nothing, right? In that sense. So that is as much as, you know, for me, Henry, it's an appeal. It's almost personal because I think like a lot of people here, I want to do the right thing. We want to do the right thing and we can do it better collectively. And I would almost pass back to Angie and say, please get involved and share your experiences and help us to find a way to get messages that stop things happening to people so you don't have to clean up the crap at the other end and get frustrated because it's almost impossible to do so.
Thanks very much, Simon. Angie, you're on mute, Angie. You've got to take yourself off mute.
Okay, how's that?
Better.
Good.
Right. Sorry, I've still got a couple of hands up. John, you've still got your hand up. Do you want to continue the conversation or are you done?
I'm done. Mistake. Sorry.
No worries. Tommy, I'm coming to you, and thank you, Simon, for your really helpful comments there.
Yes.
Tommy, I know you had a question, and take yourself off mute and ask it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Henry, and obviously thank you so much to Angie for a very incredibly powerful and informative talk this morning. It was really just to pick up on Angie's words, and also from Simon. Simon talked about what we can all do to try and basically help combat this problem. I'm retired now from my career in Standard Life, but I still work with Margaret as Deputy Chair of the Pension Scams Industry Group. And one of the things that I did set up during my time previously as chair, was to set up the Pension Scams Industry Forum. And what that is that's basically industry coming together to share intelligence on the bad guys, the modus operandi of the scammers. So trying to do the best we can to raise awareness across industry. Angie quite rightly talked about the inconsistency of practice, about how some transfers get through and other transfers of concern are stopped. Well, clearly what we want to do is we want to improve the intelligence across industry so that the lowest common denominator is raised. But the problem is that piece of, although it includes some 70 or so members just now, so it covers a lot of industry, it's not the entire industry, it's still a voluntary organisation, and it's also unfunded. Since my retirement from Standard Life, it's run now by a lady called Chrissy Sawyer from the Invensys Pension Scheme under the piece of governance. But what we'd like to do, Margaret and I are working on how we can basically, what we're going to be doing, Henry, is we're going to be going out to industry to see, to consult with industry about how PSIG can help industry more. And build on the great work that Angie's been doing and the PSIG codes of practice, for example. But that requires money and it requires commitment. One of the things that, in addition to building on intelligence, we've talked about an intelligence database, for example, to capture some of the incredibly detailed knowledge that Angie and others have got. Is also an accreditation scheme. That wouldn't it be good if the industry could certify that, yeah, we are following the best practice standards and we are protecting our customers from pension scams as best we possibly can. So that's some of the thinking that's going on. So we do intend to consult, but the problem at the moment for all PSIG's efforts is that it's crucially dependent on Margaret. Margaret personally funds it at the moment, would like to do a lot more. So we will consult with entire industry, and we're currently developing our approach to that.
Tommy, it sounds like a great example of crowdfunding being needed, and you've got some deep-pocketed providers out there who could help out. It shouldn't be coming out of Margaret's back pocket or indeed out of yours. So thank you for that. Pick up with me on this. I think there's a way forward on this. Back to Angie, because we're fast moving towards the conclusion of our session, and I'd like you to have the final word. I have a final question for you, and that's: do you think we are winning? Do you think that there is a way we can stop the scams, or will they just continue to evolve and evolve and evolve?
I think that's a very important question. The answer is no. But people only come to me when they've lost their pension. They never come to me and say, oh, I had a really close call, I almost got scammed. And they never come to me and say, oh, you know, I had a great advisor and I've made a great transfer and I'm in a much better position. So I'm not the best informed person to say how many successes there are, because you don't hear about the successes. But I think what I would love to be able to do is replicate the success of Mr. Bates v. the Post Office, because this whole thing needs oxygen, and that's something that you've said before, Henry. You've used that word. If we could do the astonishingly successful thing of producing a docudrama series about this, to tell the world, to tell the public, to tell the pension scheme savers, to tell the industry, to tell the regulators, to tell the government, I think that would be amazing. That would make a huge difference. And I think crowdfunding, going to the government, seeing if we can get a grant, and educating the industry, the regulators and the public, I think that's the only way forward. I really do.
There's a lovely comment coming from Gareth, and I think it reinforces the point you just made, which is that public service can do an awful lot more on this. Gareth, do you want to just sort of introduce yourself into the conversation?
Okay, thanks, Henry. Apologies for coming in late. I had a running meeting and then I couldn't find a link. Yeah, I mean, my background is very much in what we call the advice industry, but not the regulated advice industries. So sort of welfare rights advice, debt advice, money advice, those sort of areas. And quite clearly, the people that you tend to see in that kind of advice world are people who are under financial pressures, very often with sudden financial crises, and they're the ones who are looking for a quick and ideally easy solution. And my suspicion is that that's likely to make them hunt for things and be in that hunt, find the scammers, and relatively easy prey for them. So getting the that kind of area of the advice industry involved, I suspect, is really the fourth corner of your square. There's that other element there, and one of the problems we have, I'm in the middle of doing a big round of training on pensions, tax and benefits for the National Association of Welfare Rights Advisors around the country, which is in one way attractively hugely oversubscribed, and in the other way demonstrates the real lack of understanding. And one of the areas I think that clarity might help coming from the industry is the fact that a lot of the advice world see the word pension and immediately see regulated flashing up behind it, and don't recognize the difference between kind of regulated advice around products and more generalist advice around the issues and the numbers and how they work together.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. We have a wider discussion we can have. My problem is that we've reached the end of our hour. A lot of people have to get away. I suspect that this video will spontaneously self-destruct if I don't leave the call. So it's my happy duty to thank everybody for being on the call, but most especially to Angie, to Simon, and indeed to all the people who've contributed. I see 3 of them in front of me: Tommy, Gareth, John, but also to Peter Cameron Brown, as always, and to David Henderson, who's gone, and to Martin. Thank you very much. We will recongregate, but this recording will be circulated on my blog, and it will be available to anyone who wants it off the Pension Playpen website. Just go to media and you can click and download. Do spread the word, and we may not be many, but we're influential. So let's make sure that we use our influence to make sure that people don't get stuffed as they're being right now, have been in the past, and unfortunately will be in the future. On that sad note, I'd like to say thank you very much, and can we put our hands together for Angie for turning up in very short notice.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you to all of you.
Yeah. Right. At which point, unless there is any further, I have no idea who's turning up next week. Probably, Steve knows, but I don't. And but it's going to be good. It will always be good. And with that, I wish you farewell. Let's pray for peace in the East and pray for peace in the Middle East too. Cheers.
All the very best. Bye.